The 2003 invasion of Iraq wasn't just a war. It was the decision that reshaped the Middle East, split the world, and left wounds that still haven't healed. In March 2003, in Baghdad, sirens blended with the hum of a regime that seemed eternal. In New York, the UN Security Council chamber filled up with silences, vetoes, and speeches that no longer sufficed. Between those two poles sat an idea that changed everything: the war on terror and weapons of mass destruction. Two phrases, but only one possible destination. This is the story of choices that dismantled a country without preparing a replacement, of an insurgency that learned to speak through IEDs and car bombs, and of an echo that still reverberates in Mosul, in Syria, and far beyond. But how did the world go from 9/11 to Baghdad so quickly? Why did the weapons that justified the urgency never appear? Who won on day one? And who started winning the day after? And how did a war that promised security end up sowing deeper insecurity? Today we'll walk through, step by step, how the invasion of Iraq was decided, planned, and carried out. With rigor, without embellishment, and with respect for those who lived the war in their homes, not on maps. However, if you're new to the channel, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Here we explain conflicts that changed the world with clarity and context, so we can understand not only how the battles were fought, but what they left behind. And now, let's begin.
Channel number 5 on the left. They kill any enemy aggressor.
September 11th, 2001, marks a before and after in US policy. In a matter of hours, Washington's strategy shifts. It's no longer just about deterring other states. The priority is preventing another strike. The White House names this response the War on Terror. In October 2001, the intervention in Afghanistan toppled the Taliban government that sheltered Osama bin Laden. But in Washington, another question quickly emerges. What if the next blow comes from a state that combines hostility, ambition, and dangerous weapons? For many in George W. Bush's cabinet, that next focus is called Iraq. Saddam Hussein's regime had been a problem for Washington for years. The 1991 Gulf War ended with US troops at the gates of Baghdad, but not with regime change. After September 11th, key officials, especially in the Pentagon and the Vice President's office, argue that the US cannot risk Saddam keeping or rebuilding chemical, biological, or even nuclear programs. Weapons of mass destruction, WMDs, become the centerpiece of the case. To this suspicion, another accusation is added: alleged ties between Iraq and Al-Qaeda. The idea is simple and powerful. A dictator who hates the United States and a terrorist group that has already shown it can kill on a mass scale could find common cause. In reports, speeches, and press briefings, fragments of intelligence are presented. Contacts, go-betweens, names. Meetings in remote places are mentioned, agents' travels, and leads that never quite get confirmed. For a segment of the US public still traumatized by 9/11, the argument lands: if there's even a small chance Saddam might hand chemical or biological weapons to terrorists, that possibility has to be eliminated. Beyond weapons and terrorism, Iraq matters for its place on the map and what lies under its soil. In the heart of the Middle East, bordering Iran, Syria, Turkey, Kuwait, and Jordan, Iraq is a geopolitical hub. Its position allows it to influence routes, alliances, and the balance of power among regional powers. Its vast oil reserves make it strategic for the global economy. For its part, Saddam had spent years defying the international community, playing cat and mouse with UN inspectors, testing limits, denying access, accepting it late or half-heartedly. For advocates of intervention, tolerating that behavior eroded the credibility of resolutions and sanctions. Therefore, the invasion would not only remove a threat, it would also send a message: break the rules, pay a price. Even so, many critics in and outside the United States warned that toppling Saddam could destabilize an already fragile region, reopen old ethnic and religious wounds, and trigger a costly, unpredictable occupation. By 2002, the Security Council approved Resolution 1441, giving Iraq a final opportunity to comply with inspections and disarm. Inspectors present reports with partial findings and open questions. For the United States and the United Kingdom, those reports are proof the regime is hiding something. But France and Germany express strong political opposition. At the Council, two visions of world order collide. One emphasizes preventive action and the responsibility of power to enforce compliance. The other prioritizes strict multilateralism, procedural legitimacy, and caution. The United States concludes the UN has become incapable of acting in the face of a real threat. Meanwhile, streets around the world fill with protesters. In February 2003, millions marched in major cities against the war. But the clock keeps ticking, and US and British troops mass in Kuwait. Ships take position in the Gulf. A presidential address sets an ultimatum. And although the UN remains divided, the White House concludes that waiting only increases the danger. Within that frame, the decision is no longer abstract. It's operational. The question stops being if and becomes when and how. Those answers will arrive very soon. After months of tension at the UN, Washington decides it won't wait any longer. The Pentagon accelerates the build-up to the Persian Gulf. Leading the operation is U.S. Central Command, CENTCOM, with General Tommy Franks designing the campaign. The outline is clear. Ground forces entering from Kuwait, massive air support, and a network of special operations striking key points across Iraq. Alongside the U.S. backbone, the Army's V Corps, the 3rd Infantry Division, the 101st Airborne, and the I Marine Expeditionary Force, stands an essential ally, the United Kingdom. London contributes the 1st Armoured Division, Royal Marines, aviation, and ships. Its main mission, secure the south, focusing on Basra and the Al-Faw Peninsula. At the same time, Australia joins with Special Forces, FA-18S, and escort ships. Poland contributes the elite GROM unit and a naval component. Other countries provide airspace, logistics, intelligence, or diplomatic backing. Spain, under Prime Minister José María Aznar, positions itself politically at Washington and London's side as part of the so-called coalition of the willing. Across the Atlantic, France and Germany hold the line on no. The result is a robust coalition in military terms, but with a deficit of global consensus that will weigh on the post-war phase. Bush promises a brief, surgical, decisive war based on shock and awe, an idea combining simultaneous precision fires, electronic warfare, psychological operations, and an operational tempo so high it paralyzes the adversary's will. To achieve this, the campaign includes deep reconnaissance, feints to confuse Iraqi commanders, and preemptive strikes on radars, communications, and air defenses. Messages in Arabic are prepared, leaflets and radio/TV broadcasts aimed at Saddam's troops. Don't fight for a regime that has abandoned you, surrender. At the same time, the Pentagon greenlights embedded reporters inside units. It's a double bet, controlled transparency for public opinion and, simultaneously, a showcase for the power and precision of the military machine. Logistics are gargantuan. Kuwaiti ports packed with armor, helicopters, fuel, precision munitions, air bases in Qatar, Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, carriers in the Gulf and the Arabian Sea. But there are frictions. The Turkish parliament refuses passage to the US 4th Infantry Division. That no closes the conventional northern front and forces a rethink. Instead of a classic pincer, special operations with Kurdish Peshmerga are expanded to fix Iraqi forces in the north and keep them from reinforcing Baghdad. The promise of speed translates into a plan that tries to skip stages, not slowly encircle and destroy the Iraqi army, but drive forward in deep columns, skirting pockets of resistance and striking centers of power. The 3rd Infantry Division, with Abrams and Bradleys, rehearses fast thrusts with heavy firepower. The Marines prepare an advance along the coastal axis, pushing through Shiite cities in the south with engineers and air support, all under a sky dominated by American aircraft from minute one. On the Iraqi side, the calculus is different. Saddam Hussein has survived wars, sanctions, and uprisings, and believes the coalition lacks the strength to sustain a long war, and that international public opinion will force a ceasefire if Baghdad withstands the initial blow. The regime designs a layered defense, a diminished regular army, the Republican Guard as a shock reserve, and paramilitaries like Saddam's Fedayeen for irregular warfare, sabotage, and urban combat. Trenches are dug and filled with oil to light smoke curtains. Barricades go up on city approaches, and anti-aircraft guns are placed on rooftops to complicate air attacks. The central bet is the city. In open terrain, the coalition's tanks and aircraft have an overwhelming advantage. In narrow streets with snipers, improvised explosives, and human shields, the attrition can multiply. Saddam remembers that in 1991, after the Gulf War, Washington did not go to Baghdad. He thinks this time they won't go all the way either, if the cost rises and global TV shows wounded civilians and house-to-house fighting. The regime also counts on cracks within the coalition. It believes Turkey's refusal weakens the plan, that Arab countries will avoid a prolonged occupation, and that the UN will eventually impose a negotiated exit. Meanwhile, it sends defiant messages. Iraq will prevail. The Crusaders will be defeated. Propaganda blends with internal control. Political commissars watch units, desertion is punished, and barracks are camouflaged in schools or hospitals to deter bombing. And then there's the chemical weapons factor. Still convinced of that threat, the coalition trains its troops to operate in NBC gear. Atropine auto-injectors are issued and alarm protocols are set. Iraqi command maintains ambiguity, neither confirming nor denying. That shadow serves a dual purpose. It deters massed attacks and feeds fear in enemy ranks. At the same time, Saddam relies on the Fedayeen for a tactic that requires no technology. Surprise raids on supply lines, ambushes on convoys, using pickups, motorcycles, and civilian vehicles to get close and hit fast. The atmosphere before the offensive is a mix of technical confidence and political urgency. Brigade commanders refine rules of engagement, study route maps, passage points, and key bridges over the Euphrates and Tigris. Engineers practice river crossings and obstacle clearing. Pilots memorize no-fire zones to avoid friendly fire. Troops get anthrax shots and constant reminders. Hydrate, check your kit, protect the MSRS. On Kuwaiti docks, Marines paint names on their armor. In camps, soldiers send emails and record messages. Morale is high, the sense of technological superiority is real, and the official refrain repeats, "It will be quick." Meanwhile, UN inspectors keep visiting Iraqi facilities up to the last days, with reports open to interpretation. For Washington and London, inspections have become Saddam's stalling tactic. For Paris and Berlin, they prove that pressure works without war. By mid-March, the ultimatum is on the table. In the early hours of March 20th, 2003, Baghdad's sky lights up. The White House had issued an ultimatum hours earlier, and after detecting indications that Saddam and his inner circle might be meeting, the campaign opened with Tomahawk cruise missiles and precision bombs aimed at command complexes, bunkers, and leadership residences. It's the prologue to the main operation. Waves of air and missile strikes intended to blind sensors, cut communications, destroy radars, knock out control centers, and above all, break the regime's will. Screens around the world carry live the flashes tracing the capital's horizon. In parallel, electronic warfare aircraft saturate the spectrum, drones orbit silently, and satellites update targets by the minute. This is no repeat of 1991. Precision and speed are far greater. The main bridges over the Tigris are left intact. There'll be critical routes for the ground advance. Instead, ammo depots, Republican Guard centers, command nodes, and relay antennas are prioritized. In the south, Basra, Qasr, and the Al-Faw Peninsula also receive their share of precision fire. The aim is to open entry corridors and prevent the regime from scuttling port infrastructure. The air offensive has a second psychological layer. Arabic broadcasts go out on radio and TV, and thousands of leaflets rain down on Iraqi units with instructions on how to surrender. In the first hours, mid-level command is confused. Some headquarters lose links. Officers resort to couriers. Even so, Iraqi anti-aircraft guns open up, more spectacular than effective, firing into the void. In Baghdad, regime spokesmen appear on TV promising resistance. But whoever owns the sky sets the pace, and that advantage already belongs entirely to the coalition. Almost as the first missiles hit, mechanized columns cross the border from Kuwait. Along the coastal axis, Marines push toward Qasr and Az-Zubayr. Their initial objective is to secure the port for incoming humanitarian aid and fuel. The terrain is flat, dotted with canals, oil installations, and housing tracts. The 1st Marine Division advances in echelons: a light vanguard, armored units, logistics close behind, and helicopters overhead. Alongside them, British forces head for Basra, the country's 2nd largest city, mostly Shiite and strategic for its refineries and its proximity to Iran. The UK 1st Armoured Division seizes the Al-Faw Peninsula with an amphibious and air-mobile assault. Farther west, the US Army's 3rd Infantry Division drives hard through the desert. Backed by self-propelled artillery and Apache helicopters, they follow routes rehearsed on maps and in simulations. The order is clear: don't get bogged down in unnecessary urban fights. Bypass, pin, move on. They pass through Nasiriyah, Najaf, and Diwaniyah. Logistics are a challenge. Fuel, spare parts, water, and ammunition must flow along supply lines stretching tens and then hundreds of kilometers. Aviation and UAVs watch secondary roads and bridges to spot ambushes. Reassembly points are set at intervals, secured by infantry and barriers. Najaf and then Karbala become unavoidable waypoints. They lie on the axis to Baghdad and are cities of deep religious weight for Shiism. The coalition moves carefully, aware of the sensitivity of the ground and the risk of house-to-house combat. In parallel, special forces and CIA teams operate in the south to engage tribal leaders and prevent resistance from coalescing. In several towns, units of the Iraqi army melt away. Elsewhere, paramilitary groups try to slow the advance with harassment tactics. For Saddam's side, the Republican Guard is a strong card for defending the country's center. Its Medina, Nebuchadnezzar, and Hammurabi divisions are positioned in belts around Baghdad and along approaches. They're ordered to absorb the blow, wear down the coalition with artillery and counterpunches, and force a frontal assault on the outskirts. But they face a double problem: Allied air supremacy and a broken command cycle. Every Iraqi armored movement is exposed to sensors that call in fire within minutes. Attempts to reposition batteries or mass forces for a counterattack end under clouds of cluster munitions and artillery guided by forward observers. As freedom of maneuver disappears, Saddam's Fedayeen step in. Fanatical paramilitary groups choosing irregular war, ambushes of logistics convoys, quick strikes in towns where the regular army has vanished, while wearing civilian clothes to blend in. At Karbala, the 3rd Infantry Division executes one of the decisive moves, clearing the Karbala Gap, a corridor between lakes and marsh that forms the last gateway to the capital from the southwest. The operation combines aggressive reconnaissance, airstrikes, and an armored push that disorganizes Republican Guard units. Iraqis try to dig in, but they lack ammunition, clear orders, and every concentration turns into a target. By late March and early April, the coalition had crossed the Euphrates, secured bridgeheads, and placed brigades within operational distance of Baghdad. Then come the fast armored thunder runs into the city's edges to probe defenses, sow panic, and demonstrate that the Allies can enter and exit at will. The first surprises Iraqi forces. The second cuts arteries and reaches symbolic centers. In the south, Basra falls under British control after a flexible cordon and selected operations. Ships begin docking at Qasr with supplies, flour, water, and fuel. In Najaf, understandings with religious leaders reduce fighting and ease passage. In Karbala, organized resistance crumbles. The Republican Guard loses cohesion. Many soldiers ditch their uniforms, others disperse to their hometowns. The information dimension also pushes the collapse. With journalists reporting from M1 Abrams and LAV-25s, The world sees the precision and speed of the advance. That controlled transparency affects Iraqi morale and global opinion. By early April, Baghdad is effectively encircled by axes converging from the south and west. The presidential palaces are hit systematically. The Ministry of Information insists the capital is impregnable. Reality in the streets points the other way. Saddam appears on television with brief speeches. Some wonder if they're old recordings. The structure of fear, control, and propaganda that sustained his power no longer projects with the same force. In just 3 weeks from the first missile, Saddam's politico-military machine is tottering. The day of the capital's formal fall is near. And with it, a new problem. The day after. On April 5th and 7th, the 3rd Infantry Division carries out deep incursions that cut through key arteries and prove something decisive. The coalition can traverse the capital, strike, hold, and reorganize without being isolated. That demonstration shatters the regime's illusion of control and forces Saddam to flee. Saddam's disappearance doesn't look like a Hollywood escape, but like the evaporation of a command center. The regime's services had multiplied body doubles, recordings, and convoy movements to confuse adversaries. Some senior leaders change residences every few hours, others hide in relatives' homes, others slip out of the city in discreet convoys. The Ministry of Information, which until recently offered triumphant bulletins, runs out of spokesmen. And Saddam's absence becomes a symbol of a regime disintegrating from the top down. On April 9th, a crowd gathers around a statue of Saddam in Firdos Square. They start hammering it and tying ropes until a US recovery vehicle pulls up, throws a cable, and after several attempts, the sculpture gives way, breaks apart, and falls amid shouts and applause. Cameras fix the image. The bronze face dragged across the ground. It's a cinematic moment, but also an ambiguous one. For many Iraqis, it symbolizes the end of an era of fear and repression. For others, it will mark a before and after, the instant when the power vacuum becomes visible, because with the statue, the institutional shell that kept an oppressive order, yet an order, also collapses. That nuance will become clearer in the days ahead. Victory also feeds on the breakdown of the internal security apparatus. Many police abandon their posts as ministries fall. There's no central surrender order, but the perception of inevitability weighs heavily. Iraqi troops who might have fought harder had they felt logistical and political backing dissolve. At barracks gates, families wait for word on conscripts. Mid-level commanders weigh the risk of fighting to the end against a force that controls the sky and the approaches. For many, the most rational decision is to disappear. In informational terms, the coalition understands the power of narrative. The image of the falling statue, renaming the airport, press briefings in once forbidden palaces. Everything signals the regime's end. Journalists showed tanks rolling down avenues that bore the leader's name. In Western newscasts, the message is clear. The main combat mission has been accomplished, a notion that days later condenses into the White House's controversial aircraft carrier message. On April 9th and 10th, organized resistance in Baghdad dwindles to small pockets. Snipers remain, a few mortars, and opportunistic attacks. Marines secure ministry buildings and TV stations. Army units take up positions in key squares and at entrances to sensitive neighborhoods. Helicopters fly low, ready to provide immediate support. Logistics, potentially the Achilles heel, holds thanks to opened corridors and the first flow arriving through the airport and Qasr's port. Supply lines from Kuwait are no longer under the same ambush pressure. Paradoxically, the city offers more cover, more alternate routes, and more resupply points than the open desert. The coalition begins deploying presence patrols to deter crime and gather local information, but its numbers are limited for such a large city. The population is asked for patience, with promises that the administration will soon be restored and services will come back online. A hard promise to keep when state institutions have collapsed and there aren't enough police on the streets. Politically, opposition figures from exile arrive in Baghdad with promises of transition. Discreet meetings take place in hotels and buildings secured by Marines. There's talk of committees, councils, and community representation. But legitimacy isn't decreed, it's built. and building it in a capital where power rested for decades on fear requires time and a comprehensive plan that in those days still wasn't mature. The fall of Baghdad closes a military phase with a striking strategic bottom line. In 3 weeks, the coalition unseated a regime Western intelligence had labeled the most dangerous threat of the moment. By the book, it's a highly effective campaign. But as the cameras pull back and the dust starts to settle, the question changes. No longer, when will Baghdad fall, but who will hold Baghdad tomorrow? That story begins right here, in the instant after triumph. The regime's collapse did not immediately bring a new order. For days, the city had no recognized authority. Government buildings, ministries, archives, hospitals were left open and unguarded. Then the looting began. At first, small groups were looking for food, water, and medicine. Then, pickups and crowds emptied warehouses, public offices, and even museums. There were striking scenes. Desks and chairs carried on shoulders, doors ripped out, cables and pipes pulled to sell as scrap. The National Museum of Iraq, guarded for years, lost priceless pieces. The looters knew where to go and what to take. In ministries, files holding the state's memory, payrolls, civil registries, even contracts, ended up in makeshift bonfires or scattered across floors. In the following weeks, the occupation authorities made decisions that would shape the post-war era. One of the most consequential was dissolving the Iraqi army. On paper, the idea was to prevent the structure that sustained the dictatorship and that could organize a counterattack or a conspiracy from remaining intact. The bet was to rebuild the armed forces from scratch with new standards and loyalties. In parallel, de-Baathification was announced, excluding high and mid-level Ba'ath Party members from any public post. In the abstract, it was understandable. The Ba'ath had been Saddam's political instrument, and keeping it seemed incompatible with a clean transition. On the ground, those measures had immediate, concrete effects. Overnight, hundreds of thousands of people, officers, NCOS, soldiers, bureaucrats, technicians, were left without jobs, without pay, and without a recognized role in the new reality. The absence of police and soldiers on the streets was felt at once. Rebuilding a new police force was slow, complicated by recruits' fear of becoming targets for reprisals. Where the state, though authoritarian, used to respond, there was now a vacuum. And in any country, vacuums get filled by actors who can organize: clans, religious parties, militias, and criminals. The first days after the regime's fall were marked by mixed emotions. In many neighborhoods, there was genuine joy. Families held up photos of the disappeared and imprisoned, told stories of repression, and finally allowed themselves to speak openly. But that euphoria soon ran into daily life without services. Power flickered. Water was cut. Overloaded hospitals asked for supplies. Fuel lines were endless in an oil-rich country. Fault lines the regime had repressed or manipulated also began to surface. Sectarian tensions between Shiites and Sunnis, ethnic disputes, tribal rivalries. In Shiite areas, religious leaders filled the vacuum with committees, charity networks, and community policing. In Sunni zones that had formed the backbone of state cadres, unemployment and loss of status hit harder. Even so, the insurgency's first shots came without a single manifesto. Attacks were scattered, a patrol ambushed on a back road, a convoy hit by an improvised explosive device, a sniper on a rooftop. At first, many seemed like common crime or spontaneous resistance. But those incidents quickly showed patterns. Better target selection, repeated use of explosives, ambushes coordinated with diversionary fire, and getaway routes. It wasn't just anger, it was organization. Who was behind it? Several layers. Former Republican Guard and Security Service personnel with tactical know-how provided planning. Islamist groups, seeing in the occupation an opportunity for jihad, provided ideology, propaganda, and a recruitment network. Criminals who had thrived during the looting supplied clandestine logistics and black market expertise. And over time, outside actors, arms traffickers, foreign volunteers added resources and know-how. The coalition tried to respond along two lines: security operations and reconstruction. More frequent patrols were launched, intel-driven raids and hearts and minds programs, repairing schools, clinics, and power grids. Recruiting and training a new police force and new Iraqi armed forces began. But the insurgency had an advantage. It could choose when and where to strike. It didn't have to govern. Each successful attack eroded the perception of control and reinforced the narrative that the occupation was vulnerable. The psychological impact was sharp. Coalition units started to armor up more. Body armor, helmets, vehicles with anti-IED kits, and larger convoys. That protection improved troop safety, but also widened the gap with the population. House searches were carried out more cautiously but more brusquely. Roads were closed for hours after an explosion. Markets suffered long checks. In tense neighborhoods, the balance between security and approachability became hard to sustain. After Baghdad fell, special teams tasked with finding chemical, biological, or nuclear weapons combed through labs, bunkers, and depots. They reviewed documents, interrogated scientists, and followed leads that intelligence had presented as solid. Weeks passed, then months, without decisive findings. Old shells were found, facilities that had once produced dual-use chemicals, half-baked plans, but nothing to justify warnings about an operational ready-to-use arsenal. The absence of weapons of mass destruction had two direct effects. Internationally, it drained support and trust. Allies who had doubted from the start felt vindicated. Publics that had accepted the intervention as a necessary evil began to see it as a decision taken on faulty information. Domestically, inside Iraq, the narrative of liberation lost force. Many Iraqis, who expected proof that Saddam posed an imminent danger to the world, concluded the occupation's reasons were different. That suspicion not only fed criticism, it also gave ideological ammunition to the insurgency, which could present itself as a legitimate response to a deception. On the ground, violence changed in form and intensity. What began as irregular harassment became a sustained insurgent campaign. Improvised explosive devices multiplied along roads and avenues. At first, they were simple command-wired bombs. Then, they incorporated remote detonation, phones, pressure triggers, and shaped charges capable of penetrating armor. Car bombs, driven by suicide attackers or left parked, hit police stations, recruiting centers, markets, and mosques. The insurgency was not homogeneous. In Sunni areas of the center and west, former officers of the old army and tribal networks organized command structures. In the Shiite holy cities, militias emerged that initially filled the security vacuum but soon competed with each other and with the state. Organized crime took advantage of chaos to control routes, extort businesses, and co-opt officials. The most dangerous lever was sectarianism. Attacks on Shiite pilgrims, bombs in Sunni mosques, and targeted killings of community leaders. The aim was to rupture coexistence and drag the population into opposing camps. As bodies piled up in morgues and families were threatened to leave the wrong neighborhoods, the war took on a civil cast, sectarian ethnic cleansing block by block. Coalition forces tried to adjust. Provincial reconstruction teams were reinforced, Iraqi units formation was accelerated, and counterinsurgency tactics focused on protecting the population rather than endlessly chasing insurgents were adopted. But the asymmetry persisted. For the insurgent, one strike a month could be enough to maintain a climate of insecurity. For the government and its allies, a month without attacks was the exception, not the rule. This power vacuum, the humiliation of occupation, the availability of weapons and explosives, and a narrative of religious war formed an ideal mix for jihadist groups. One of them, led by Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, became known as Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Zarqawi understood that the most effective way to prevent the country's stabilization was to ignite sectarian conflict. His attacks focused on Shiite civilians, on shrines, on recruits for the new security forces. He sought to provoke reprisals, and with them, homogeneous enclaves where he could operate more easily and pose as the protector of Sunnis. Al-Qaeda drove the violence to a brutal level, with beheadings broadcast on video and mass casualty bombings. Its tactics pushed Shiite militias to respond with equal ferocity, generating a cycle of reprisal that bled the country. In that crossfire, civilians were the main victims. Many Iraqi Sunnis rejected Zarqawi's extreme agenda and later organized the awakening councils to expel jihadists from their cities. But that chapter would come later. In the immediate phase, jihadism gained space, perfected networks for financing and propaganda, and left a residue of fear that constrained every attempt at negotiation. Years later, after name changes, leadership churn, and a temporary retreat, its remnants and cadres reconnected with Syrian chaos to evolve into the group the world would know as the Islamic State. Its lightning expansion between 2013 and 2014 cannot be understood without the seeds planted in Iraq after 2003. Prisons where future leaders met, poorly guarded arsenals, communities distrustful of the central state, and a collective memory scarred by sectarian violence. What began as an anti-occupation insurgency mutated over time into an extremist proto-state project that crossed borders and drew thousands of foreign fighters. Meanwhile, daily life in Iraq was defined by insecurity. Parents who once thought about salaries and schools now thought about safe routes, curfews, and lists of names. Skilled professionals emigrated, shopkeepers shut down, hospitals militarized. The economy, which needed stability to revive, was trapped between explosions and closures. Reconstruction lurched forward, an electric substation repaired, then knocked out by an attack. A police station opened, then destroyed by a car bomb. Every step forward seemed to carry a price in lives and in trust. Politically, institutions were set up. A provisional authority, an interim government, elections, and a new constitution. But written rules needed reinforcement from everyday facts. The cop gets paid and can get home. The judge signs without fear. The teacher teaches without escorts. The invasion of Iraq had been conceived as a surgical operation. Strike, decapitate the regime, change flags, rebuild. On paper, the sequence seemed plausible. On the ground, reality was different. 9/11 pushed the United States toward a preventive doctrine. Intelligence pointed to a threat that didn't materialize. Military superiority delivered a stunning victory. And the day after, it overwhelmed every plan. The fall of Baghdad brought down the dictator, but also the institutions that, however flawed, held the country together. Into the vacuum poured mistrust, militias, resentments, and opportunists. The war changed shape. From conventional maneuver to counterinsurgency and sectarian conflict, with society trapped between car bombs, curfews, and funerals. For millions of Iraqis, daily life became a chain of defensive choices. Which street to take, what time to leave, whom to call if someone disappeared. Reconstruction became an uphill battle because every material gain, a school opened, a police station functioning, a repaired power line, had to compete with fear. The lessons aren't comfortable. Military power can topple a regime, but it doesn't by itself guarantee order, legitimacy, or reconciliation. Intelligence can be wrong, and when it is, it can drag entire societies into decisions with unforeseen costs. Foreign policy needs exit strategies as clear as the entry plans, and a fine-grained understanding of the identities, networks, and memories that inhabit the countries being intervened in. It also leaves a warning for everyone. When narrative overrides facts, the price is usually paid later, in neighborhoods, in hospitals, and in morgues. The truth is, the 2003 invasion of Iraq was presented as a swift and necessary victory. In reality, it opened a wound that reshaped the Middle East, cost hundreds of thousands of lives, and changed how the world sees American power. A war launched in the name of security that ended up sowing even more insecurity.